The unjust conviction of 9 protesters in Texas today has been portrayed as a victory against Antifa terrorism. Prosecutors claimed the demonstrators were part of an Antifa cell and argued their actions during a protest outside an immigration detention center amounted to supporting terrorism. But the case reveals something far more troubling than a supposed militant network. It highlights how the concept of Antifa has been distorted into a political weapon, one used to criminalize dissent and manufacture a domestic enemy. The central problem with the narrative is simple. Antifa is not an organization. It is not a secret network, a clandestine movement, or an underground militant group. The term simply means anti-fascist. People who describe themselves as Antifa are expressing opposition to fascism, authoritarian politics built on nationalism, repression, and the suppression of democratic opposition. That position is hardly radical. In fact, opposing fascism is one of the most widely shared values in modern democratic societies. After the Second World War, it became a foundational principle of the political order in the United States and much of the world. Most Americans, regardless of political affiliation, would say they oppose fascism. In that sense, Antifa is not a fringe movement operating in the shadows. It's simply the collective label for people who reject fascist politics. The reason Antifa has no centralized leadership, membership lists, or formal structure is precisely because it represents such a broad segment of society. There is no headquarters for people who oppose fascism. There is no chain of command for ordinary citizens who object to authoritarian rule. The absence of organization is not the evidence of secrecy. It is evidence that the term describes a shared belief rather than a coordinated movement. Yet in recent years, Donald Trump and his political allies have deliberately recast Antifa as something sinister. Trump repeatedly described it as a terrorist organization and attempted to designate it as one, despite having no legal authority to do so. The effort was never about legal accuracy, it was about political storytelling. By portraying Antifa as a shadowy extremist network, Trump created a convenient domestic enemy. The name itself helps the illusion. Antifa sounds foreign, vaguely militant, and ominously similar to the names of terrorist groups such as Al-Qaeda. That resemblance is politically useful. It encourages supporters to imagine that political opposition is not coming from ordinary Americans, but from a dangerous internal conspiracy. Now, this narrative serves an obvious purpose. If critics of government policy can be labeled terrorists, their arguments no longer need to be addressed. They can simply be dismissed as enemies of the state. The Texas case shows how this rhetoric is beginning to move from political theater into the justice system. The charges stem from a 4th of July protest at the Prairieland Immigration Detention Center outside Fort Worth. Demonstrators gathered for what is known as a noise protest, a common tactic used to show solidarity with people being held inside detention facilities. The idea was simple. By setting off fireworks and making noise outside the facility, detainees would know that people outside were aware of their situation and supporting them. Things went wrong quickly. A small number of protesters vandalized property in the parking lot, spray-painting surfaces, slashing the tires of a government vehicle, and damaging a security camera. When guards confronted them and police arrived, the situation escalated. One protester, Benjamin Song, fired a rifle and struck a police officer in the shoulder, though the officer survived. There is no dispute that the shooting was serious and criminal, but the prosecution went far beyond the actions of a single individual. Instead, it argued that the entire group was part of a coordinated terrorist conspiracy tied to Antifa. 9 defendants were tried together on charges including rioting, weapons offenses, attempted murder, and providing material support for terrorism. Yet even within the trial, the idea that the group constituted an organized Antifa cell proved difficult to support. Some of the defendants had never met before the protest. Others knew each other only through unrelated social circles such as book clubs, political discussions, or firearms training groups. The prosecution relied heavily on circumstantial evidence, meant to suggest ideological extremism. Investigators presented anti-Trump stickers, left-wing reading materials, and small independent publications known as zines. One pamphlet displayed to the jury included an image of a swastika being thrown into a trash can, a fairly straightforward symbol of anti-fascism. Encrypted messaging apps were also cited as evidence of conspiracy. The protesters used Signal, an app that allows messages to disappear automatically. But this practice is common among journalists, activists, ordinary citizens, and even the US government. Likewise, the prosecution pointed to the defendant's dark clothing, describing it as tactical gear, even though many of the items could be purchased at everyday retail stores. Even more striking is that the terrorism statute used in the case does not require any connection to a terrorist organization. Legally speaking, prosecutors did not need to prove that Antifa existed as a group at all. The charge simply requires showing that someone assisted another person in committing certain serious crimes. Now, this contradiction became clear during the final moments of the trial. The presiding judge questioned why the term Antifa should even be mentioned in the jury instructions. His comment exposed the gap between the political narrative surrounding the case and the actual legal framework being used. In other words, Antifa dominated the rhetoric of the trial, even though it was essentially irrelevant to the law. The fact reveals the deeper significance of the case. The label was not used because it clarified the charges. It was used because it carries political power. The United States has reached a moment where political leaders increasingly treat dissent itself as a threat. Protesters opposing government policies, whether immigration enforcement, policing, or authoritarian rhetoric, are being reframed as extremists. By invoking Antifa, the government can blur the line between protest and terrorism. This represents a dangerous turning point. In democratic societies, protest is not only legal, but essential. It's one of the primary ways citizens express opposition to government actions. When dissent is recast as terrorism, that basic democratic principle begins to erode. Ironically, the real political extremism in contemporary American politics is not coming from loosely connected protesters opposing fascism. It's coming from movements openly questioning democratic norms, attacking the legitimacy of elections, and embracing authoritarian rhetoric. Labeling ordinary critics as terrorists allows those movements to deflect attention away from their own radicalism. That is why the myth of Antifa persists. It's not an underground army waiting to strike. It's simply the collection name for people who oppose fascism. Teachers, students, workers, journalists, and ordinary citizens who believe authoritarian politics should be resisted. And there are millions of them, because most Americans still believe that democracy is worth defending. Calling that belief terrorism does not reveal a hidden conspiracy. It reveals a political strategy. When leaders can no longer silence dissent through argument, they attempt to criminalize it instead. I'm Anthony Davis. You can find me on the 5 Minute News YouTube channel and podcast, on Wednesdays co-hosting Uncovered, on Global AF, on Legal AF, and on Sundays on The Weekend Show with MeidasTouch.
Love this video? Support independent media and unlock exclusive content, ad-free videos, and custom emojis by becoming a paid member of our YouTube channel today. You can also gift memberships to others. Let's keep growing together.